The SNP will be tabling a second vote this Wednesday on whether Britain should call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, you'll remember that last time they did this, Labour whipped their MPs to abstain. So what about this time around? Well, at Scottish Labour conference, Keir Starmer did seem to have changed his tune.
An end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts. Conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
That was Keir Starmer getting a very big round of applause for deciding 30,000 dead Palestinians was probably enough. But would it mean Labour would vote for the SNP motion? This was Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy on the BBC.
I haven't seen the motion. It's not yet put down. We will scrutinise that motion, as is our way in Parliament. That will come in on Monday, I suspect, Tuesday, and we will take it from there. But look, let us be clear. Yes, we will have a vote in Parliament this week, but it's not that vote that will bring about a ceasefire. It's the diplomatic action. It's Hamas. It's Benjamin Netanyahu. It's Partners for Peace saying the fighting must now stop.
David Lammy, the motion's actually been published already, and we've got it here. The SNP motion says this House calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Israel. It notes with shock and distress that the death toll has now risen beyond 28,000. That is the motion. It is crystal clear. Will Labour vote for it?
Well, look, I've seen that swirling around social media, but that's not a motion. That's just a form of words swirling around social media, and I don't think that was the entirety that you read out.
That's not a motion, that's just a form of words swirling around social media. Well, do you agree with it? Right? It's actually pretty basic. We demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza right now. That's the question at hand. I think it's important to note here because Starmer said in that speech, we want a ceasefire, we want a lasting ceasefire now. And he's a very lawyerly person. And the more words you add before ceasefire, actually, the weaker the demand becomes. Because if you say, I want a ceasefire now, then, okay, ceasefire now. If you say, I want a lasting ceasefire now, then the Israelis can say, I mean, obviously, the Israelis don't have to respond to this motion anyway, but how sort of this kind of thing works. The Israelis can say, in theory, oh, yes, we would like a lasting ceasefire now, but Hamas aren't offering us a lasting ceasefire because they'll say the only way to get a lasting ceasefire is to completely destroy Hamas. So a ceasefire now is a powerful demand. A lasting ceasefire now is not, because it gives you all of this wiggle room. And what does Keir Starmer love? Wiggle room, right? Labour have still not confirmed whether they will vote for the SNP motion. Wes Streeting, though, did offer a new development this morning in terms of Labour's assessment of the war.
Every country in the world has a right to defend itself, but I think what we've seen are actions that go beyond reasonable self-defence and also call into question whether Israel has broken international law, and the ICJ are now investigating, and we take all of that seriously. What Keir has sought to do throughout the conflict is to work in lockstep with our allies and friends in the region. Countries like Jordan, Egypt, Qatar have huge agency in this conflict and have been doing an awful lot of diplomatic heavy lifting behind the scenes, as has the United States. And we've sought to conduct ourselves in the way that we would if we were in government. And lots of people are engaging with Labour on the basis that we could be the government later this year, including the world leaders that Keir met over the weekend in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. Has Israel gone too far? Well, I think objectively, yes. Israel has gone too far, and we see that with the disproportionate loss of innocent civilian life.
The subtext there was that Labour now feel they can say Israel has gone too far because Joe Biden has now called Israel's war over the top, right? That's why there's all this talk of moving in lockstep with our allies. We won't do anything the Americans won't do, right? And Streeting says this is how Labour would govern. So no bold moves, and simply saying whatever the Americans do, we will agree with. It's a position without any principle. It's also taken Britain down some really dark roads before when it comes to foreign policy. And, I mean, as will be obvious to you, Labour do keep changing their position, probably because they're not driven by any principle. Now, an example, Wes Streeting said there in that interview that Labour take the ICJ ruling seriously. Well, this is what he said last month when asked about the ICJ.
On Gaza, you rejected the idea of a ceasefire. The South Africans have gone to the International Court of Justice in pursuit of a ruling which would have that effect. David Cameron's told me this morning he thinks that's just wrong. Do you agree?
I think it's a distraction from what needs to happen, which is the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about an end to this conflict.
So in January, the ICJ case was a distraction. Now Labour are taking it seriously. What changed? Right? Is there some material facts on the ground changed? Or has Labour now decided that its focus groups are suggesting, oh, maybe now is the time to take these charges seriously? I say focus groups. I think actually this has much more to do with sort of appealing to elites, right? Appealing to a foreign policy establishment, because as we know, ordinary voters want a ceasefire. Helena, how do you think Labour will vote this time around, or how do you think the Labour Party will whip its MPs to vote on Wednesday when the SNP put its ceasefire motion forward?
I think it's unlikely for them to vote for the ceasefire motion. They may whip to abstain specifically. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. The first of all is that it's a motion that's been tabled by somebody who they do not want to govern with, the SNP. Considering that's the SNP who proposed the motion last time that they whipped to vote against, I think that whilst we want to, I think, agree with the SNP on the moral justification for the vote, there is also a kind of political bent to what's happening there, where they are deliberately trying to push Labour into having to retract previous positions that they've held, which obviously we've seen in practical terms, but we haven't seen in legislative terms. And that's why one of the political reasons, I think, is the SNP have tabled this very specific motion. And so what would kind of be a motion that they don't want to have to seem to be, or to be seen to be allowed to get played by the SNP this issue. And I think that that level of kind of political machination is something that it frustrates me, but I understand the reasons for it. The second of the reasons is then we will call into question. If you're going to vote for this SNP motion, why didn't you vote for the last one? Why is it now, 28,000, well, that's too many, but when it was 20,000, it was 25,000, that's a fine level of civilian casualty. I don't know why this is suddenly the barrier for unacceptable loss of civilian life. And what this really kind of calls into question is whether any of the positions that Labour ever take are from a position of moral fortitude. I mean, you covered that in the previously contradictory positions being said by Mr. Streeting there. And I think obviously they don't. They are all tactical positions in terms of where they think they are going to get votes from at the next election. We've seen much coverage of not just the Muslim vote, but the people who support a ceasefire in Gaza pulling their votes away from the Labour Party in response to their position on this very specific issue, which, as you've also detailed, is essentially taken from the US State Department. Of course, they haven't directly called for a ceasefire in the US yet, but we have seen other US-aligned countries who usually take their geopolitical orders really and truly from the US State Department have called for a ceasefire officially. There was a joint statement being made by New Zealand, Australia and Canada calling for a ceasefire. And given that Keir Starmer was literally talking with Anthony Blinken in Munich on the 17th, I believe there could have been some conversation between the two of them upon the kind of statements that are within their remit to be able to make in terms of being in lockstep with our allies. But again, all this calls into question, why now? How has it taken this long? Why is 28,000 the magic number of unacceptable civilian casualties? And then again, as I mentioned before, why did they vote no the very first time this was tabled? So I don't think they'll whip to vote yes.
I think even potentially saying why now is being too kind to them, because I still don't think they are strongly calling for an immediate ceasefire. Because as I say, if you say it has to be a lasting ceasefire now, you give wiggle room to the Israelis, and the Israelis are going to use that wiggle room. What happens when you borrow your positions from someone else? If you borrow your positions from the US State Department, you're not going to be very confident explaining your stance yourself, right? Because you didn't come up with it. You just borrowed it from someone else. And that was proven in this latest clip of Rachel Reeves being confronted by two women in Leeds.
Obviously, we've been following you for a really long time.
All right, nice to meet you.
And we just really wanted to understand.
We are about to start.
That's really good, because we want to make sure that Riaz and you do really well.
Yeah.
And it's really important to us that Labour wins this.
Yeah, right.
It's been a long time waiting.
14 years.
The only thing is that we're really concerned, Rachel. What's your current position in respect of what's happening in Gaza at the moment.
We should have this conversation separately.
Well, we've tried to have this we've tried to have this conversation, and you've not been available.
Can we start the campaign session? So
It doesn't work. We've tried, and it's not working.
Are you in my constituency?
We've tried through the mosques.
Are you?
Because Katani's been in touch.
Are you? Oh, well, I've seen Arshad recently.
Yeah.
Are you in my constituency?
I'm not, but I'm a part. I'm a
okay.
part. I'm a Muslim, and I live in the UK, and I pay my taxes.
You're with us.
His office does speak to a wide range of constituents every week, and if you are a constituent,
in fact, I was in touch with Arshad Katana last night.
Is there a reason why you can't answer the
Because
question?
I have a huge number of people contact me, and my surgeries are for constituents.
So does that mean that every
issues.
time a different person contacts you, you have a different answer?
No.
Because we just simply want one answer.
Sorry,
They're only simple questions.
Got to speak to people in the constituency.
They are simple questions, right? I mean, it's just really pathetic, I think. Like, obviously, I want, and my position is different from the Labour Party's position, right? I think there should have been an immediate ceasefire back in October, right? This idea that this is a war by a state defending itself and trying to take out a terrorist organisation. Their words from the start have been clear. This is a war to try and take back a territory, right? To try and destroy any Palestinian hopes for statehood, right? They've been making those statements from the top of government this whole time. But, you know, if I was Rachel Reeves, if I had chosen the wrong position, I would at least be able to argue for it, right? You should have just said, yeah, of course, we all want to see a ceasefire. We all want to see no one die. We're all horrified to see this, but what we want is a long-lasting peace, yada, yada, yada. You know, the crap that you hear Keir Starmer say all the time. But she can't even do that. She's just like, I'm campaigning, why are you talking to me? You know, the robot is somewhat malfunctioning. Like, you just speak like an ordinary human being for 2 minutes, right? You have some disagreements, and you say, look, I recognize we have a difference of opinion, but I've got to go campaigning now. You don't act as if the mere question, the mere idea that a member of the public could go up to a politician and politely ask them a question, that's suspicious. Book in with me in my constituency office. That's the only place I will have a conversation with another human being who isn't an advisor, you know, or another politician, or someone at the Bank of England, or someone who runs a FTSE 100 company, right? Talking to ordinary people shouldn't be that scary, Rachel, right? Especially if you want to be the Chancellor. Amateurs.